From a very young age, I was always doing both of these things. And the little whisper in my ear from my parents was always like, was just remember the art is a hobby and and the science and the math is your job.
Subconsciously, there's this tendency to take away that playfulness and take away that freedom of being a beginner. Even though logically we know that we are beginners and we're not supposed to know anything, there are no expectations. We put these expectations on ourselves.
I want my work and my life to be in service of something broader, but also acknowledge that like I am a person. I'm just one person, and this is my only life.
Welcome back to the Happy and Human podcast, listeners. It is just me and a very special guest today. Dinesh is off living a very full life, and this guest was so incredible. My options were wait to have him on till Dinesh was available or to have him on now, and I picked have him on now. With us today is Dr. Deepak Kumar, who is a professor of computer science and engineering at UC San Diego. But he's also a playwright, a lyricist, and a composer. So his computing work focuses on how to make internet systems safer and more secure, but his plays tackle the questions that keep him up at night. So whether they're about Asianness, technology, youth, board games, or soul-eating demons, he's got you covered in terms of his playwriting skills. His shows have been developed and produced all over, with some highlights including the Old Globe and the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center. And he's a MacDowell Colony Fellow and currently on commission from Audible and the Arena Stage. Dr. Kumar, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be there.
Yes. I'm going to call you Deepak if that's okay.
That is perfectly fine with me.
We like to be friends with our guests on this show.
Yeah, that's great. I hate it when people call me Dr. Kumar, so that's great.
You really? That's interesting. I feel like for a while there, I hate to admit this, but there was definitely an ego kick that I got from using that, and then and it started to sound really to me. So
I think part of it is, for me, part of it is just that the pursuit of a PhD is, I think at the end of it, you realize how little you know. And so being called a doctor by the end, you sort of feel silly calling yourself a doctor because the universe sort of expands to you and you realize, wow, I have a very small amount of knowledge. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
God, that was,
or maybe I just don't like to take up space. Yeah, maybe I just don't like to take up space. Who knows?
For those of you wouldn't know, of course, but if you listen back to several episodes ago, we had Sharanya Rao on, who is a coach. She's a former attorney, and she in Austin runs a nonprofit called Anklets in the Boardroom through the Leela Theater, which is all about bringing diversity and things to society. And she actually is the connection between Deepak being here today and the podcast. Deepak, you hosted, or she did a table reading, correct?
She did a full staged reading of House of India, my play, in Austin. And it was sort of a community project done through Leela and in collaboration with the City Theater in Austin. And it was a huge success. And I actually hadn't even heard much of the updates until I was Googling what had happened with this project. And then I learned, oh my gosh, they did it. And so I reached out and I said, congrats, hopefully it went well. And we got connected there. And then obviously that's how I got connected to you, Seema. So.
Yeah, no, I wasn't able to make it there, but it was really, everything that they do is really fantastic. So if you're in the Austin area, check them out. But you know, what really got me was how unconventional, when Sharanya and I were talking, how it was really unconventional. The storyline was not what I thought it would be, coming from a South Asian author. And so can you tell the listeners kind of what that play is? You don't have to share the whole thing, of course, because we don't want them to have them spoiled, but just kind of what's this about?
Yeah, the play is called House of India. The play is currently in rehearsals for a production that's happening at the Old Globe in San Diego. So that's both thrilling and terrifying. The play it's called House of India. It's about an Indian restaurant called House of India in the Midwest, which is sort of a rough approximation of the town that I grew up in. And the way I describe it is that it's the Indian restaurant that you know exists in that strip mall that you drive by, but you've never gone into. So it's there, it's still part of the community, but it's certainly not doing the best. And the play follows the family that runs the restaurant, chiefly Ananya, the sort of matriarch of the family, who is running the restaurant kind of in memory of her late husband, and she's sort of hanging on to it for dear life. It is the thing that she built when she immigrated here in the late 80s with her husband, and it is everything that she has in this country. And the next generation, her kids and the cook that works at the restaurant, who want to turn the place into Indian Chipotle. And so it is this frame for talking about obviously the life of this restaurant, but it's this frame for talking about generational differences, about asking questions about the American dream, not from the lens of I just immigrated here and I'm going to make it for myself, but what if I did that and now I'm retiring or in my sunset years? I mean, I'm thinking about my parents really, and asking like, what does this country have for me, and what did I give up in order to belong here? So that's what the play really is about. Though of course, it's a family drama comedy that sits inside of this universe about this restaurant. So.
That you bring up so many interesting perspectives that I don't think we really consider very often. And identity, I know for my parents, even they have stepped into retirement within the last couple of years. And there is a real reckoning of, we moved here, we gave up so much to be here, and now our kids are grown and they're raising kids, and now those kids are no longer babies to where they need grandparents. So like the kids are off on their own. What does that leave? What does that look like? You talked about again the wife losing the husband and that being there, and then
Right.
All of the things that come with owning a business in the Midwest.
Yeah.
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 Beautiful. So, I mean, my question really is, how did you get here? Because when I hear engineer and
Right.
PhD, I don't really think playwright. I have to.
Yeah, most people do not think playwright. Um, the story is a little circuitous, but really where it starts is with my own mother, who at a very young age determined that me and my younger brother, both of us, were to be well-rounded people. So at the age of 5, she put me in Carnatic violin lessons and was like, you're going to learn Carnatic violin at the same time that you're going to Kumon, right? Or at the same time that you're doing this math stuff and the science stuff, but you're also going to do music and art. And so from a very young age, I was always sort of doing both of these things. And the little whisper in my ear from my parents was always like, was just remember the art is a hobby, and and the science and the math is your job. Of course, I'm sure I was internalizing it, but I wasn't necessarily acting on it. I just knew growing up, I was always doing these two things. So from the age of basically from 4 or 5 years old, I was doing art stuff and I was doing science stuff. This continued through high school, where I was continuing to do math and science stuff at the same time that I won't call it theater because it really wasn't theater, but it's sort of pseudo theater stuff in high school. My high school was very small, so we didn't have a huge theater program. So instead we did other sorts of theater adjacent things. But I was still doing that stuff in high school. When I went to college, I was a computer science major, and I was also doing collegiate a cappella. So I was, singing in a choir and music directing and arranging and those kinds of things. And then I went to graduate school because I really enjoyed the research aspect of what it means to be a computer scientist. And so I got into a PhD program and moved to Urbana-Champaign, which is at the University of Illinois, which is where I was doing my PhD. And for the first time in my life, I don't know, at that point I was 22 years old, the first time in my life for a full year, I basically didn't do anything creative. I just focused on like, okay, time to be like a real adult, I guess, and focus on the career and focus on the work and focus on the job and focus on this. And I did that for a whole year, probably about 10 months before I reckoned with the fact that I think I was really deeply unhappy. But But it was very confusing to me because I wasn't unhappy with the work. In fact, I loved the work. I really enjoyed the work. I enjoyed going to work every day. I enjoyed the stuff I was doing. I felt intellectually stimulated. I felt challenged. I think I realized then, sort of in a flash, almost like a movie moment, like there's this thing that I've been missing that I'm sort of yearning for because it's been a part of who I am my whole life, which is some sort of creative expression. And I don't know exactly the impulse to say, I'm going to turn that into writing, except that I grew up watching television and I'd always been sort of interested in how this stuff sort of happens. And so it's like, okay, well, I don't really want to do a team sport like a cappella group or something like that, just because it's so much effort and work. And I don't know how much time I'll really have to give to this thing. So why don't I try something a little bit solo? I thought about painting for like 2 seconds, then I realized I have no skills in painting. So then, okay, well, maybe I'll try writing. It seems like a fun way to like spend some evenings here and there when I don't want to de-stress or something. So I did the nerd thing and I took a bunch of classes. So I took a bunch of online classes. In fact, the first thing that I did was at that time, masterclass.com was just starting out, and one of their first offerings was dramatic writing taught by Aaron Sorkin, who is an amazing playwright and screenwriter, has written things like The West Wing and Social Network. And so I really liked Aaron Sorkin's work, and I said, okay, sure, I'll take this class. And that was my first sort of dipping my toes into that world. So after that, I of course did the nerd thing again, which is that I went through all the syllabi I could find for every like screenwriting and playwriting class 101 at like USC and UCLA and all these places that I knew had pretty good programs. And I looked at the books that they recommended and I read all those books. So I was just spending the next 6 months kind of falling into the rabbit hole of learning about this world, about this craft, thinking about things like character and plot and diction and conflict, like these things for the first time, and really falling really deeply into that. And then I just started writing. I called up a friend of mine and I said, listen, I don't know what this impulse is about, but I think we should write a musical. And she responded. She herself was also in a similar place in her life. She was at the time a software engineer at Google. And she's one of the best pianists I know, one of the best musicians I know. So I was like, we should write a musical. So that's absurd. We don't know anything about writing musicals. I said, yeah, but why? Why not? Like who's going to stop us? So they started working on our first show, and that musical turned into more opportunities, which turned into more opportunities, which turned into more opportunities. And then eventually I started writing stuff on my own, which is how this play, House of Romeo, came to be. And that is the short version. I'm skipping out all of the failures and self-doubt, but everything else sort of happened in that trajectory.
Well, I heard a lot in there, and I want to highlight the last part, which you intentionally left out, right? But
Right.
that is absolutely real. There is failure and self-doubt. And what I heard also was you have to be willing to be a beginner. You
Yeah.
have to be willing to not know anything about it. And
Yeah.
I think too, for many of us, if you don't know how to do something, especially when you come from careers that are like medicine or law or engineering, where there's a very specific algorithm, there's a specific procedure, it's easy for us to say, well, how I got to where I am is to fill the knowledge gap with a didactic component. So I'm going to just read until
Right.
I'm blue in the face and then never do.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was my impulse. I mean, my impulse was like, well, it's easy. It's easy. The thing I know how to do is read books and like learn stuff, I guess. So why don't I start by reading books and learning stuff? It is scary to then like venture out and say, I'm going to try to write something. And in fact, the first thing, it's so embarrassing. No one will ever see this, but the first like little 10-minute screenplay that I wrote, I remember writing it and like being really excited about it. And then I sent it out to a friend, and my friend responded, he's not a writer or anything. He's just another person that enjoys the same things as I do. And he responded and said, you've written the first scene of the social network. And I said, oh, I really, and then I looked and sort of side by side compared. I think I did sort of just straight up copy because that's what you do when you're starting out is that you just want experience and reps. And so to some extent, I think I just implicitly was like, well, I like that movie. So let me just write something that sounds like something that I would like. And I ended up writing the first scene of that movie.
Yeah.
Um, so
Proof that you don't need AI to replicate something.
and yeah, your brain is perfect. It's a perfect replication machine. I'll say one other thing on this beginner thing, which is that I actually think for creativity or for something creative, being a beginner is the best part because you actually don't know anything and there's no one putting you in a box. So you can just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
As soon as you start showing it to other people that perhaps have more experience or more craft or more knowledge than you is when the feedback loop starts and then you're not a beginner anymore. But being a beginner is just it's thrilling because you can do anything. And to some extent, it feels like you're playing again, like you're a child again. You
Right.
have this sort of like childlike. We're all creative when we're young, when we're kids, and it just feels like that when you're doing something for the first time. So
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think many of us, myself, I'll put me in this category too, is subconsciously you there's this tendency to take away that playfulness and take away that freedom of being a beginner because we tell ourselves like, even though logically we know that we are beginners and we're not supposed to know anything, there are no expectations. We put these expectations on ourselves. And in our minds, we create what we think it quote unquote should look like or sound like or feel like. And when you have such a very, very narrow bandwidth of a range of acceptance, if you will, it can very easily suck the fun out. And I love that you talked about not only is it expected, but it's okay. And it's actually critical to you getting good at anything is being at that beginning stage, being in that opening place where there's not a right or a wrong. No one's told you anything. You're just expressing.
yeah,
It's beautiful.
yeah, it's the best part. And this is gonna sound like a cliche, but you don't know that it's the best part while you're doing it. And even if everyone in the world tells you it's the best part, you won't know it because at least if you're like me, you're so hungry for the thing and you want it to turn into something and you want it.
Yeah.
I want to make this so someone will shoot this show and to do this and you have all these big dreams and in the process, I think you don't realize that you're actually kind of living it already.
Yeah.
That you're kind of already doing it, but you only realize that 10 years after you started and you're like, that was the best part.
Yeah.
when nobody else except me was here with the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think eventually you develop your own style or your own people start to sort of expect something of the product, right? Oh,
Totally. Yeah.
their plays always are funny or they're always thought-provoking. And then when you want to go a different way, it's like, wait, what is that? I mean, I know Shah Rukh Khan, for example, so many of his roles were this romantic, whatever. And then lately he's been doing a lot of action.
Yeah.
And early on in his career, he wanted to do a lot of action. And somebody said, no, you are really typecast for being like the hero of a love story. And so that's what I did for years and years and years, right? So when you see him in this different role, it's almost jarring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Regardless, I don't know if he prefers the action. I don't know what he likes doing. But I would imagine that kind of is similar for you. I know we've experienced that even with the podcast to some degree is people get used to a certain thing. And that's great because it's working. And that it's resonating. And also it's important to keep playing and pushing those boundaries and being willing to be a beginner even when you're not, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally. That kind of like external acceptance thing is sometimes a challenge because there's this pressure that then you turn it on itself and you start putting the pressure on the thing to say, oh, well, it has to be this way because we've always done it this way. But then as soon as you do that, you almost cut it off from some of the joy that it's given you in the first place. So I am always wary of that. In fact, I'm so wary of that my goal for the writing is that no two plays should ever be remotely similar. And that's sometimes in theme, that's sometimes in form, that's sometimes in just the characters that I'm trying to present, but I'm very aware, I guess, of that particular aspect. And especially because I'm pretty early on in my playwriting life. This production that's happening in San Diego is my first world premiere of any play I've ever written. So this is the beginning of the journey for me. But I'm still conscious of that because I want to make sure that I'm constantly also challenging myself and constantly being a little bit underprepared for whatever I'm going into, because I think that's also just more fun.
Yeah. And that's such a great, it's so exciting. Congratulations.
Thanks.
To be on the precipice of something that really, truly, the sky's the limit. And it's really, really exciting and incredible to kind of, I would imagine for you be here watching it become more tangible. You mentioned that you were in the rehearsal stage
Right.
of things where,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I would imagine things are getting rewritten. Things are, your blocking and staging of what actually happens on set is also changing. And, like literally everything is up for a rewrite, I would imagine at this point.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, I've rewritten, so we started rehearsals 2 weeks ago. I've rewritten, I've probably touched every page of the play in some way, shape, or form. And there's still stuff that, I was texting my director this morning. Oh, this scene, it's not doing the thing we need it to do, or maybe it's directionally wrong. Maybe it's in the wrong place. Maybe I need to put it here. Maybe they need to talk less. Maybe they're not feeling, all of these things are stuff that we're discovering in the process.
Yeah.
And what's astounding is that, I wrote the first draft of this like 5 years ago. So like, it's still, I go into the rehearsal process thinking, this is a great play. And you walk in and the second you've got 10 collaborators on it, all looking at it and dissecting it and asking questions, you start to, that's, to some extent where the self-doubt comes in.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, is it a good play? Is it bad?
I like how you went from, this is a great play to,
yeah.
Is it a good play?
Well, that's like just how self-doubt works, right? But I think it's scary to sit in, but it is, I think, also a helpful motivator for me, because I am a slightly anxious person, to turn that into fuel for, well, what is the real feeling? There's a self-doubt, which is like, okay, am I good enough? Is this thing that I've made good enough? But then there's the feeling underneath that feeling, which is like, well, then what do I think is really not working? Because it's coming from somewhere. For me, at least, it always comes from, well, actually, I think that scene, I'm being really truthful with myself. It's not really working, actually. And maybe it's not working because this is slightly wrong, or this is slightly wrong, or this is slightly, and so then it becomes fun again, because it's something that you don't understand. You have to go and try and figure it out.
Yeah, it goes back to your alternative is to implode or get curious. Right.
Yeah. And I'm always trying to turn towards curiosity, because implosion is bad.
Nobody wants to implode. That's not
Right.
what you're gaining.
Yeah.
Wanting to, to create. And
Yeah.
It is. And to your point, where something that seems so right on paper in practice can feel so different. And then not only that recognition and that willingness to, I don't know who said it, the phrase, but to kill your darlings, basically.
Oh my God. I've killed so many darlings.
Right? Like, and because I think I've discovered this as I have learned to write speeches is, am I saying this in service of the audience, or am I saying this because the story is actually more meaningful to me than anybody else, in which case I've got to cut it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had that experience probably 10 times in the last 2 weeks, where it's like, I thought this was really important, and it is really important to me, but it may not be that important to the audience. In fact, it may be confusing them.
Yeah.
And what I have noticed, frankly, for myself, is that a lot of this happens when I want to be clever. I want to be smart. I want to be witty. I want to make a joke. Something that I think, in retrospect, one of the learning parts of this is that for theater, especially, it's never about you. Actually, it can't be about you.
Yeah.
It has to be about everyone else. It has to be about the audience. It has to be about the actors. It has to be about the director. It has to be about everyone else who's interpreting what you're saying. If you really wanted it to be all about you, just go write a book, like then, and even then it's not really about you.
And then nobody will read the book. You have to put the audience first, even in a book.
Yeah, right. But I've noticed these jokes or this language or this like poetry or the whatever that I'm finding in the play that I'm like, now that it's being spoken by somebody else and it's not just a voice that's living in my head, maybe it's got to go in service of something that actually moves the story or moves the character or moves the audience to a more specific version of themselves. So
But I think we do this in life, right? I know many of the listeners are probably like, that's great, but I'm not a playwright, right? Like I don't compose music. But I am curious to know what you think, Deepak, but I feel like we tend to do this in life as well, right? Where we'll say, you know what? I'm not going to do X or I am going to do Y because I think it's going to serve a purpose. But in reality, it's only serving you. And I'm all for self-compassion and pouring into your own cup before you can pour into others. All of that said and done. When you're trying to your point, you said, when I'm trying to like be witty or something, I'm trying to get something out of it instead of allowing it to just unfold organically. That's when the stickiness and the resistance happens. And then you're like, well, it's not actually in service of my goal. It's just words that I'm saying, or I'm just taking action to take action. I'm not actually doing it in a way that's going to intentionally create an outcome that I want.
Yeah, and I'll give a slightly different take on that, which is, I think oftentimes we find ourselves stuck in things that we said that we were going to do. Yeah. So we write out a version of our lives. We write out, the script for how we think the next 6 months are going to go, or the next 12 months are going to go, or the next 18 months. And then those become our darlings. Even when the goal, which is, whatever it is for each individual person, but for me, like to like be happy and fulfilled, may not be being served. When you're in month 4 and you're in month 4 of the plan and you're like, is this thing that I had written before for myself still serving my own goal? Right. The analog in the play being, I want this play to be good. I want this to be impactful and emotional for the audience. Right. The life analog is, well, what is it? Inward. And I think I'm so guilty of that. I do that all the time, where I find myself like stuck doing something that I told myself that I should do. Yeah. But in the moment, it's not really something anymore. Yeah. Yeah. And often we should all over ourselves in terms of, I know running is really great for me. And also, I don't love running. Well, then maybe there's something else that I could do that still gives me that cardio workout, that still gets me moving and all that. But it doesn't have to be running. But somewhere along the way, I told myself, I have to run because that's what's good for my heart. And that's what's good. That's just one example. I think that example came up because now I actually am not a runner. But I'm looking to play with that a little bit. So I think that's why that came out. But yeah, I think we do that all the time. And I love that how we experience life really kind of unfolds for you creatively as well as, and I love how you termed the inner analog, which is where that awareness can really help us shift into that joy and that fulfillment that you were talking about. But yeah, totally. I have a question here. I know we talked about you're in computer science. It's a very technical field. I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a creative job. Would you? Well, it depends on what you mean, of course. Because of my flavor of work, because I do research, there is a sort of creative aspect to research, but of course it's within the parameters of like what is interesting and what is tractable. That's how we think about research. So like, are there interesting problems? Yes, there's lots of interesting problems. Are those interesting problems things that we can do something about? Well, those are the tractable problems. And so even there, while I think there's creativity involved, it's bounded, to some extent. It exists within a framework that was provided by centuries and centuries of people that do research in science. So it's a good question. Yes and no.
No. I mean, when I think, is my job creative? Most of us, dentists, lawyers, engineers, whatever, professors, there's, I'm not saying there's not a creative element in there, but I think creative and I think like Imagineer,
Yeah.
or Pixar or something, an artist of some sort. That is a playwright. That's super, super, super creative.
Right.
And I had a client tell me one time through our work, they were saying that they found themselves to really start to think outside of the box and get creative with how they view specific challenges and situations. And they said, I never thought of my job as a doctor to be a creative one, but I actually find that I'm thriving the more I lean into my creativity and bring that into what is typically, quote unquote, the hard sciences and I'm curious what your experience is. I know you mentioned that the writing and things really is what rounded everything out for you.
Yeah.
But creativity is really what I heard you say was it's an essential ingredient to leading that life that you want to live.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is for me totally necessary because I think part of what I find really fulfilling in life is to, I think I said this earlier, but like look for moments of play, like look for moments of like connecting with myself as a kid, like the inner child to some extent. Because I do feel that without that, it's very easy to fall into this, like, for me, trap of self-seriousness. Not that I don't take my work seriously. I think I take my work very seriously, but one of my goals in life has always been to not take myself too seriously and acknowledge, not to get too metaphysical, right? But like acknowledge that I'm just like I'm just one person. I'm one person in a small universe. I'm sorry, I'm a small part of a very large universe.
Yeah.
And that I want my work and my life to be in service of something broader, but also acknowledge that like I am a person. I'm just one person, and this is my only life. So I should find ways to like nourish it. And for me, falling into the like I'm doing a very important thing trap is it is the trap. It is for me the way to like fall down a hole of unhappiness for myself. So this is where the creativity comes. For me, I think it's so important to try and find that in any job.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. Self-inflation of the ego, that just sets us up to take this like ladder of fall, right? Where you attach something and you
Yeah.
desire, and if it works out, then you're prideful about it. And if it doesn't,
Yeah,
you're
right.
upset about it. And
Yeah.
It's
scary. It's scary. It's a little easier to be, I find it a little bit more freeing to be just a little bit more detached and seeking areas of play more than areas of accomplishment.
So I know we all have our own answers, but we hear this all the time, especially in self-development. And then the more spiritual, you get, you hear this term detachment, right? But how would you describe that to somebody who's maybe just starting out and is like, listen, I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not really into the metaphysics of everything. I'm very concrete. And how would you describe how to detach and why that's important?
Yeah, it's tough because I can't speak with authority. This is something that is like the hardest thing in the entire world to do. So I can only speak to like what I'm trying to do for myself.
Of course.
When I was starting out, I would say I was very attached, like very attached to the prospect of whatever. Like if it's in academia, it's like the attachment to a paper getting accepted and that being a mechanism for me to feel like I have accomplished something. If it's a theater thing, oh, I want that prize, I want that semi-finalist thing, I want that opportunity, I want that acknowledgement, I want that production. And I was in this hole for myself for about 2 years, speaking specifically about the playwriting stuff, where I was really tearing myself up that it sort of hadn't happened yet. Um, I had this conversation with, at that point, sort of a person we were just meeting, but has now become a friend, who did everything that I was very envious of at that time in my life. So he went to school for musical theater, like studied writing with all of these amazing people, like did all of this awesome stuff. And so I was looking at him like, oh, you're the person who, if I had been stronger 4 years ago to my parents and said, I'm going to study this, like you're the person that I would have been. And I was having coffee with them, and they said something I felt so profound that has continued with me throughout the rest of my life, especially as it relates to my creative journey, which is, he said for himself, I have recognized that in this life, like I have to be totally okay making art and doing things such that it will never happen for me. Like, and that I will only like that is the only way that I can be fulfilled in making stuff. And that has turned into sort of a corollary to my whole life. Like that I have to be okay if I'm doing something that it is in service of just wounds at its core. And I can't be attached to outcomes. I can't be attached to the whims of the universe. I can't be attached to this grant getting funded or whatever, because everything is noisy and everything is sort of random. And where it starts with for me is, can I do this for just myself?
Yeah.
And although that does, I think, still feel a little bit like attachment, at least to me, it's like detaching from almost every other aspect of what you're hoping for from the thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
Just like, as soon as he said that to me, I think I became a lot more chill as a person and a lot more relaxed. And I honestly started to do better work because I wasn't worried about, oh, who's this person's going to think this? Is this going to be edgy enough to get me this thing? Or am I, are they going to think that I'm smart? All of these other fears and anxieties and worries and attachments to perception sort of vanished in that moment. And it's been something that I carry with me in all aspects of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that what you shared about that was, we tend to think in this black and white, like I'm attached or I'm not attached.
Right.
But what you said in the way that you said it was, well, it allowed me to soften my grip.
Yeah.
Right. There is, yes, some attachment. And over time, I imagine with practice and stuff that gets easier to release and let go. But if you've never loosened your grip, even loosening it a little bit can feel really foreign and therefore really scary.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Because you want to control things,
Yeah.
and you want to just like be in control of everything. But actually, like, you have such little control that if you're tightening something, if you're grasping on something too hard, you're only grasping what you can touch, and then you're going to suffocate it and it's going to die. So,
wow, that was well said.
So, thank you. I do right place. No, I'm kidding.
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like I could chat with you forever, but I wanted to make sure that I got in our wrap up questions that we always ask of our guests.
Totally.
The first thing being that, you live in an instant gratification world. You have a ton of experience with, computer sciencing at Stanford and USC and all these wonderful things. You also write plays and you're into music and all of this stuff. What's one thing you can share either within those fields of expertise or just something completely random that will, if you shared with somebody, they could listen to that and be like, okay, that's really cool. That makes my life a little bit sweeter, a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about sweeter or more interesting, but here's something that I think is totally true that I've learned in every aspect of my life. And to take it all the way back to my mom, who put me in this class, like at the beginning we talked about at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah.
I think do a little bit a week. Just do a little bit a week. And after 10 years, you will have so much done if you just do a little bit a week. It doesn't matter if that's exercise. It doesn't matter if that's starting a new hobby. It doesn't matter if that's, like wanting to get a PhD, like all of these things. It's just like, you don't have to do a lot, actually.
Yeah.
You just have to do a little, and you have to do it every week. And that feels like something really hard. It's actually really hard to do forever.
Yeah.
But if you really want to accomplish something in that way, and you want to feel like you've done it for yourself, that's the only way to do it is you got to do a little bit a week. So
yeah. I love that. I love that it takes the pressure off of, I don't need to live at the gym in order to get this exterior physique. I don't need to upend my diet or go in a hole and never talk to anybody ever again if I want to get better at meditating. Like it's literally just consistent micro efforts that are going to yield really, really big results. And to your point, I think why it's so hard for people to keep going is we tell ourselves it's just, an hour a week, or it's just twice a week. And you don't see necessarily the results that fast if you do micro doses, and then you can get demotivated, but you can only enjoy that vista once you've climbed the whole mountain, and that takes
totally
a little time.
Yeah, it takes a long time, and it's hard to take the long view on stuff. But the long view it's so worth it on the other end. And I'm not claiming I'm on any sort of other end. I'm still very much climbing a mountain. But like when you're a quarter up, way up, and you get that one vista point that lets you look back at where you came from, it's pretty cool. It's like, I came so far.
Yeah. Especially where we do hit Amazon Prime now, or,
totally
on demand, this TV show right now. It's, I remember my kids were little and it was taking like a hot 3 seconds for the movie to finish, and couldn't handle it. We do live in that instant gratification world, and continuously, it also cultivates your ability to take that long perspective. Because I think we desensitize ourselves and we lose that ability to take the long game, look at things the faster and faster we expect to get things done in other parts of life. So yeah. So this part of the show is actually my favorite. It's called Ask It Forward. Listeners, if you're new to the show, this is where a guest previous to Deepak has left a question, not knowing who they are, who the guest is going to be, what we're going to be talking about. Even when we're going to be recording, they've just left a question. And Deepak, you get to answer that question and then turn around and leave a question for the next guest. You ready to play?
Sure. Terrifying.
Okay. So this question is from Dr. Krishnan Narasimhan, and his question to you is, what recently gave you true personal joy?
You alluded to it already, actually, but there is... I'm in rehearsals for this play.
Yeah.
I've never seen it staged in any way. So I walk into the rehearsal room, and they've set up the restaurant. I mean, like, it's all set up. Like, there's a stage and there's tables and all this stuff, and the actors were all sitting there, and they were walking around. There's this one scene where on the page it's like two characters. They sort of like, they're kind of in conflict with each other, and so there's no stage direction written. They're just sort of talking in the script. And then I was sitting, watching them do it for the first time, and both actors like stood up at the same time, like kind of ready to fight almost. And I was like on the edge of my seat, like, oh my gosh, are they gonna kiss? Like, I have no idea what's gonna happen. And it was like deeply thrilling. It was like, oh my gosh, this is the impulse of like stuff that came out of my brain, but then interpreted in a way that I could have never possibly imagined. Like I didn't write it in. I didn't tell them to do these things. They're just doing it on the impulse of being in that moment. Yeah. And now that moment in the play, like in the staging of the play. And it was like, wow, that is pretty thrilling. Yeah. So That's absolute joy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like someone telling you that this restaurant is really, really good. And then you go and it's come like anything you've ever,
Totally.
you
Totally.
know, or like a movie or a book that you thought you had heard was good, but then it really hit home for you and it really
Totally.
right. Just
Yeah.
seeing that something like that come to life, especially I would imagine something that you created within the depths of your being to come to life and materialize in this world is, I would imagine, be a very joyful thing. Amazing. Well, what is a question that you would want to leave the next guest?
The question is, what is something in the last week that really surprised you?
That could be interpreted in at least two ways, if not more. I love it.
Yeah,
So
at least
good.
two.
I can't wait to share that with the next guest, whenever and whoever that is. Thank you for playing.
Sure.
Okay. Well, Dinesh and I, there's no way we can actually truly thank you for all the knowledge and insight and, honestly, the time you lead a very full life. And we're grateful that you've come on and shared with us and with the audience to create something so special. So given that, what we would like to do is pay it forward ourselves and make a small contribution to a nonprofit that is near and dear to your heart. And we love doing this, because when we share with the audience, they get to learn about other causes that are out there that they may want to look into and support themselves. But also, we want this podcast to be something that benefits everyone, even if they've never heard of it or they've never, they might never ever know it exists, but we want everyone everywhere to benefit. So what is a nonprofit that you feel you would want us to support?
Yeah, there's a nonprofit that I give to semi-frequently called the Shankara Eye Foundation. They do free eye surgeries for, I think, typically cataract surgeries for elderly people in India who have cataracts and who can't see anymore. But cataract surgeries are something that we know how to do, that they're pretty fast and recovery is pretty quick. And so oftentimes access is not available to people that are living in rural India or that are in underprivileged parts of the country. And so this is an organization that goes out and does those surgeries. And I give to them semi-frequently. I really love the mission. And my fiance is also an ophthalmologist. So like we think about vision, we think about blindness and those kinds of things. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I've heard a lot about their organization. And I know even in Austin, they do at Diwali time and Navratri, they do some local events to raise awareness and funds. And it's really, really great. So we're honored and excited to support that mission. And you guys, if you haven't heard about it and don't know about it, check out Shankara Eye Foundation. They really do some life-changing work. Deepak, we're so thrilled that you're here. We want the audience members to know where to connect with you, where they can go see your play, all of those things. And I know there's going to probably be maybe some budding playwrights out there who are just ask some questions. I don't know, but we want to give you some space to amplify your work and tell us where the audience can connect with you.
absolutely. Yeah. You can find me on the internet. So you can find me at my website, which is Kumar DE, my last name and the first two letters, my first name.com, or deepakwrites.com. And there's contact information and stuff there. You can find me on Instagram at _Kumar DE. You can also see my play, House of India, at the Old Globe, playing from May 10th through June 1st in San Diego. And so you can go and check that stuff out there.
Yeah.
Too.